everyone. My name is Neha Batra. My Twitter and GitHub handle is NerdNeha, and it is an absolute pleasure to be here with you all at LeadDev and getting together after so long. So this is where you can woo. I'm like super excited to be here with you all, and I'm glad that we're all here in person. We gathered here today because we care about leadership, and we know that how we show up to our teams is just as important as the decisions that we make. So today, I want to talk to you about building culture through communication. Communication is something that I'm really passionate about and I'm fascinated by because I've seen how communication is directly tied to your team's culture. And in fact, I don't think that they can be decoupled as concepts. Communication, if you're not careful, can become an afterthought. And when you do that, things start to fall apart. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, have you ever been at a meeting where you are making a decision with the team and then someone's like, all right, cool, decision done, meeting adjourned. Jordan, can you just like take care of the comms and like send that out? And I use the word comms as like communications. I'm gonna use comms a lot, so that's like my thing. Anyway. So they're gonna be like, yeah, Jordan's gonna be like, sure, like I'm gonna send out whatever we decided, right? That's when sometimes it goes well, but then sometimes it doesn't go so well. Sometimes it doesn't really go well at all. And so I've seen my fair share of that. Like sometimes people are surprised by the decision that you make, and they don't get why it happened. Or maybe people are just actually out and they're not able to read the comms at all, and so they miss the message. Maybe there are a ton of follow-up questions, right? Maybe Jordan puts the post out and it's actually too late and people have been asking what's going on for a while. So anyway, I'm gonna stop myself. Do these pitfalls sound familiar to you? Have you experienced any of those? I'm seeing a few nods. I mean, they certainly do to me. I'm Jordan. Like, I've made these mistakes, right? So they happen when communication is an afterthought and made at the end of a decision when it shouldn't be. I think it's super easy to fall for this proverb, right? Actions speak louder than words. But like, follow with me right now, right? As a leader, part of the job of doing these actions is to talk about them with words. So when you're telling people about your actions, you're using words. And so it's not that actions speak louder than your words. It's that your actions only speak as loud as your words, right? In other words, communicating a decision is a decision itself, and it may be the only way people have access to the decisions that you make. The way that you communicate reflects your culture. And that also means that choosing not to spend time on communicating is a decision in and of itself. And I'm going to say this because if you only get one thing out of this talk, this is the point that I want to make. Communication is the expression of your team's culture. And that's especially true now. I mean, we're still in a pandemic, right? The world has changed, and companies have been forced to become more and more remote friendly. There's no going back. And so it's pretty much always true, but especially true if you're remote. When you're remote, your words are all that you have. So I'm going to show you. So I've got two examples for you of communications that we're going to dissect together, right? I want to show you how you can see signs of a team's culture within the communications. And don't worry, I did not use anyone's comms here in the audience today, so you can relax. I'm just going to roast myself, so I'm here for your entertainment, all right? So you can be relaxed. Okay, so here's the first one. It's a message we put out for a performance review season. I'll give you a second to kind of review it. Like, don't read too closely. Like, I did redact it, and I like cut it down so that it would actually fit into a slide. But I want you to take a look at this and just think about what you immediately notice, right? Where was there special attention paid, and what's missing? And then I'm going to dissect it for you. All right? Okay, so keep your criticisms to yourself. I got this. All right, so first things first, what happens in the first line? hey, everyone, I know this is pretty late in the game, but better late than never, haha. So, okay, we know that she's late and she's like not always timely. But then in the second part of this, right, we're in a mid-year reflection cycle. You can see this is a link, right, linked back to documentation that exists to kind of give you bigger context around what's going on. And then you can see in the second paragraph, first things first, something that might not be obvious that has changed is blah, 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 blah. So this is great. We're contextualizing what's going on, right? You're giving people access to the important information. You're bringing it up front. And then you say, I said, not you. I said, I'm hoping this alleviates a lot of pressure that we might be feeling for a mid-year review, right? So that's nice. Sharing intentions. Weird place to put it, Neha, like not hidden in the second paragraph, but that's okay. Good intentions are actually reflected here. And then you can see in the third paragraph, there's like a little bit of time spent on advice. There's some time spent on what is expected of you and what you can expect from your manager. So there's some attention to expectations. Little section here on like self-review, so a little help doc. It even says who the audience is intended for. That's good. And then you can kind of see a whole section for dates. This is something that I love doing. We love a good date section. If you're going to be serious about comms and you want to hold yourself accountable, you put your dates up, you put a helpful key around it, and you include time zones, because not all of us are in the same time zone anymore, and we can't assume that. And there's also a lot of acronyms, so I think I need to work on that. It's not exactly new joiner friendly, right? And then at the end, you can kind of see a little shout-out section. So there's shout-outs to people who have good communication. There's shout-outs to people who actually gave me feedback about this post, and I wanted to credit them because I changed my post because of it, right? So what did we learn? We learned that there's like a few values present here, right? Around clarity, right? We had intentions, expectations. Around inclusiveness, right? There was a separated dates. There's some emoji to kind of like give you a cue for when something's an event, so that when you go back to the post, you can find it easily. And there's like some time zones. For helpfulness, right, there's linked docs, there is a section on what changed, and there's some advice. And then there's a little sense of gratitude, right? There's shout-outs at the end. We end on the word thank you. So let's do a harder one, right? Here's a message on resignations. When you're announcing that someone's leaving the company, like, don't lie, I'm not the only one that's going through this, right? Right, this is the Great Resignation. So I think you can tell a lot about a team's culture through the resignation post. So I'm going to dissect this one for you too, but I'm not going to be as mean because this is like a sensitive subject. It's okay. So this is when I was announcing someone who was reporting to me was leaving. We start with a little emoji cue, right? So there's a little sad face with a little teardrop. So I still say what's going on. I say that someone's leaving, but I give you a little cue about the emotion that you may or may not experience, so that as you're scrolling through, you kind of know, all right, like I got to brace myself. We have a date there. As you can see, I will point out dates forever. There is a little, it's hard to see here because I redacted the message, but I always have like a from them themselves, right? So a personal message that they can write where they tell their own story about leaving and how they feel about the company and whatever they want to say, right? So you let them tell their own story. You can kind of see here, this is where my lol sob story that I decided to tell. I tell about their impact. I give a personal note. I also decided to, again, I don't know why I keep on doing this, but like there's like a sentence in the middle of a paragraph about hiring, right? So what's next? That would have probably been better in a separate section. That's okay though. Neha, you're working on it. And something that's funny, right? When you omit important information, in this particular instance, we didn't say where they were going next. We just forgot to mention it. And so we got a lot of questions that were like, hey, where are they going? What are we hiding? Why won't you talk about it? And like, honestly, it was just an honest mistake. And this is how easily, like, just omitting a few facts can actually like lose a few cycles. But we learn. You can see here, there's like a little message about the big picture, about like how to process some of these resignations. And there's even a section for questions, right? The last post didn't have any section for questions, but this one does. And it even gives you multiple people that you can reach out to. So it doesn't just have to be one person. And then there's a little prompt at the end, right? So, hey, share your memories below. And then I was a little salty in the message. It's fine. You don't have to read that. So what did we learn, right? We learned again, clarity came up, specific dates, information about hiring, FAQ direction. There is a sense of helpfulness, right? There's that big picture message. There's the emoji queue again, cohesion, right? There was not only a personal message so that people could tell their own story, but there was also multiple people that you could ask questions to. So that gives you that sense of team cohesion. And then there is a sense of curiosity, right? That prompt allows people to share with each other. And so you're role modeling that so that everyone else can start asking those questions and feel comfortable doing that too. Okay. So I just showed you 2 posts. I think you learned a lot about me and like what I care about and what I value, and also like the sense of the team. And you can see, especially if you think about what is mentioned more than once. So 2 times we had like a lot of intention around clarity and helpfulness, and then you can also see some sense around like inclusiveness, gratitude, cohesion, curiosity. And there were also things that were like not exactly there or inconsistent, right? That timeliness thing that we talked about. Seriously, I don't know why I'm doing this to myself on stage. But anyway, placement of information, that could be improved. And I noticed, I didn't even realize this before. I thought every single time I'm reviewing someone else's comms, I'm like, oh, make sure you include TLDR section. Where are my TLDR sections? So do as I say, not as I do. And I learned a lot about that. So if we just examine these 2 pieces of comms, you can learn a lot about a team. And I think it's actually pretty on brand for me. Like these things that I noticed, and I wrote the message, but like this is what I noticed. I actually think that you should try this too. So if you take a pair, both of you can pick a piece of comms, pick it apart yourself, then share it with each other and see what you come up with and what you learn. And I think that you'll learn a lot about yourself and a lot about what other people notice. All right. I made it so that you can see the lagging indicators of culture. But what if we reverse the direction of the equation? So instead of inferring how the culture is from the comms, what if you were intentional about how you communicated based on the values that you had? All right, so this is the 3rd section. Good things start with intentionality. So take a moment and think. If you wanted your team to look at your comms and pick up on certain values, what would they be? Like, what would the adjectives be that people describe? And absolutely feel free to whip out your phones or your laptop and write down those values, because I'm about to tell you mine, and I don't want to like interrupt that thought flow. So take a second and think about the values that you want your team to be known for and reflected through your comms. This is like where you pause the video, but you can't pause the video, so I'm like just going to be silent for like a second. Okay, so hopefully you have like 1 or 2 words in mind, right? And I've picked 4 values. So I'm going to share one idea for each value. And for these, I said that I wanted my comms to show that we are inclusive, helpful, trustworthy, and predictable. And so I've picked an example for each one to give you an idea of how you can imbue those values into your comms. And that's because you, as a leader, have control over those comms and how they feel and how they're delivered. So here's a few things that you can try. So the first one is, I want to introduce you to this concept of imaginary panel. There's probably like a really official word to use, but I don't know what it is. So I call it an imaginary panel. This is like if I'm communicating something important, I'll write my first draft. And then afterwards, I will think of 3 or 4 people that I want to read from their perspective. And I'll go through and I'll edit my post, right? This is my panel. This is like my crew. And those people are generally kind of like someone who's newly joined, a designer, a PM on the team. Like if I'm doing eng comms, I want someone outside of my function. So design, PM, support, docs, any person who like might not have as much context. Someone who's like leadership to your team. So that might be a VP, it might be a CXO, it might be a director. And then someone who isn't afraid to ask hard questions on the team. Like I literally have these names like written in my head. And so I'm going to say like, oh, you know, what would Taylor say or what would Aaron say, right? So I read through those comms and I do the edits. And sometimes I know those answers and sometimes I don't. So sometimes I'll do a little usability test and I'll send it to someone in each of those 4 categories. Or, you know, as a director, I'm managing managers, and so I don't get to talk to the people that report to them as much. And so I almost use this as an opportunity for us to talk to each other and build some trust. So if I just randomly reach out to 1 or 2 people and I say, you know, totally no pressure, hey, do you have a moment? I'm about to put this post out tomorrow. And I ask them 2 things. I ask them, what did I miss? and what's your biggest takeaway? And I use that information to help inform me. And then, as you can see in the, was it the performance review post, I actually credited them. And I said hey, thank you so much. I actually went back and I changed this line, and I'm going to put you in my recognition section. Is that OK? Right? So you can kind of build with the team by doing this. So I have a little story for you. So you may or may not know, but GitHub's had a few outages recently. And there was a lot of chatter around what we knew and what we were still learning within our channels. And it was using a lot of vernacular that, honestly, I didn't exactly fully understand. But, hopefully none of my managers are reading this. And I knew that I wasn't alone. So I, actually DM'd someone. And I said, hey, how much do you understand of what's going on? And this was someone who had newly joined. They were part of my imaginary panel. Well, they were part of my reality panel at this point because I was talking to them in person. And they were yeah, I kind of get what's going on, but I don't exactly understand certain pieces. And so I went out, as a leader, I can kind of just march into a channel and I could be hey, can I have a volunteer for something? And so I went to my staff channel. I said, my staff engineer channel, and I asked, hey, can I have a volunteer for someone to write and explain it like I'm 5 post, right? I don't have the answers, but I can ask for the answers, and I'm not afraid to look stupid in front of them. So I asked for an ELI 5, explain it like I'm 5 story, which means that you explain a difficult concept in plain language. And then a manager and a staff engineer paired together on that. And it was so good that we decided to release it to the whole engineering area. And make it more public within GitHub so that people can learn about what's going on and use plain language. That was because I was thinking about this imaginary panel. And so I want to ask you, who's on your imaginary panel today and who's missing? Who do you want to add to it? The second thing I want to talk about is how to make your comms a little more helpful through consistent language. So using cues that, when entering certain types of conversation, kind of help people understand what they're getting into, and also make them more locatable, right? The important information can be easy to find. So I use emoji cues, right? I use the little megaphone. Anytime we're doing a major announcement, I'll put it in a discussion that's public to the team or even to GitHub. And then since it's public, I'll cross-post it into our community's water cooler channel, which is private, and I'll be hey, megaphone, title in bold, and then close megaphone. It's my thing. You kind of know what you're expecting when you see that. And anytime there's an action item, I try to use the little pointy hand, and I'll point to the link in a separate section below. So that is so that I can be consistent and give people more information. And that also means that if you have people who are async, right, who are not in the time zone that you're in, they might wake up to a lot of messages. And so they're scrolling up and they're trying to find what's important to know. And so by having kind of that bolded, sectioned out area, you give people that cue of that there's something important to read, there's something to follow up on, and they can find it a lot easier. And so that is the verbal kind of version, a little tip that I have for that. The corollary is written, the corollary to written the corollary to written consistent comms is verbal comms, right? And by that I mean catchphrases. So in one-on-ones, I try to use similar phrases when I'm trying to start certain types of conversation. And that kind of primes people to know what they're getting into. And so I actually get made fun of this. I was talking to my reports one day in a team sync, and they were oh yeah, Neha, anytime I hear the phrase I was surprised by, I know we're entering a feedback conversation. And I was basically being roasted in front of everyone because everyone else is yeah, that's totally true. She does that to me too. And so on the one hand, it's a little embarrassing that I'm so transparent and predictable. But on the other hand, that's kind of the goal, right? If I can start a conversation consistently every time and it resolves well, then people know that they're entering a conversation and it might resolve well too. I want that predictability. And also, that kind of is a little delicate balance. So if it doesn't resolve well once or twice, then I might abandon the catchphrase because I don't want that to be triggering and have people feel they're going to enter the same cycle with me again. So here are some phrases that I put out that I use all the time, and I get made fun of for using all the time, and I feel really good every single time I get made fun of for using all the time, because that's my goal, is I want to be consistent. So for example, whenever I just told you this, right? Whenever I go out to my imaginary panel, I'll ask what's missing, right? They hear that every single time. So soon, when I start sending them those comms, they're like, oh, I know she's going to ask me what's missing. So I'll read that with that question in mind. Or what stood out to you. If someone's coming to me for advice, something new I'm trying, I haven't gotten consistent yet, is what have you considered so far? So opening up with that and giving them a chance to tell me their journey so far before I jump into asking for advice. Or what do you think? Or what can I help with? And so the last one is, whenever I'm trying to talk about something and I want to learn a little bit more before I give feedback, I'll say, I was surprised by fact, I expected to see expectation, what happened? And so then we kind of talk it out. The third example I wanted to talk to you about has to do with trust. You can build trust with a team by making a commitment and holding it true over time. And the longer that commitment is tested, and the more that you pass, the more trust that you gain. And a great example of that is in our department, I have a commitment where there are no major announcements in team meetings, right? If there's going to be a reorg, if there's going to be anything that changes, I don't want them to be nervous coming into that meeting, because we noticed that whenever we did those town halls and we got everyone together, there'd be this whisper, a buzz, and people would be like, are we getting reorged? Is someone quitting? What's the big announcement? Why have you gathered us here today? So we're like, all right, bet. I'm going to make these consistent. They're going to be the first Thursday of every month, and they're going to be absolutely no new communication. If you get that, it's going to be in writing. And so I just don't think we do our best work when we're wondering what might happen. So that's why we made that commitment, and we'll basically make that announcement in writing, maybe in a private channel if you have to, and then eventually we'll have it in public in a place where you can easily find it, right? And then I just want to encourage you to be obnoxious every single time you do it. So when you're building trust with someone, right, you might have this intention in mind that you want to fulfill this promise. And so I honestly, every single time, originally when we started these meetings, every single time we joined the meeting, I'd be like, see, no major news, right? And I want to reinforce that point, and I want to help them along that journey and see that the intention is there. It's not accidental. It's because I planned this out, right? And so I think you could be obnoxious every single time you fulfill a promise. The fact that you're doing it, I think you could say it nicely, and you could just be like, hey, this is just reinforcing my intention to blah, 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 right? And the opposite is true. If you miss or you mess up, tell people that you did, right? Own up. Be the first person to mention that and say, hey, this was not my intention. This is what happened, and here's how I won't do that again, right? That still can give you an opportunity to build trust. All right, we're at our last example. So what I want to talk to you about is how you can make your comms more predictable. And that is something that is desperately needed during a time of instability, which is now, right? So comms plans. I literally have a comms plan for anything major that's changing, to the point that people are like, all right, what's the comms plan? It's gotten automatic. And so a comms plan is just a fancy checklist for communicating anything. It's the output of the process of figuring out who, what, when, where, about what you're, or why, about what you're trying to communicate. And I get roasted a lot for how I jump into those details, but it's because there's important parts of that plan that I don't want to forget. And I have before, and I've learned my lesson. So here's two simple examples. When someone's joining a team, chances are you want to ideally announce in a similar fashion. You want to make sure that people reach out in a similar fashion, and you get everyone on that checklist. You want to have a way to welcome them in a similar fashion, and you want to make sure that their squad, they get added to the team meetings, and they get asked to say hello, all in a similar way. And the corollary, right, is leaving. 1 second. The corollary is leaving, right? So you want to kind of give people a graceful way out in a consistent way. So you got some time to read this. So that's great, right? Every single time you want to do that change, you can create this checklist. But at some point, things are going to get consistent, and you want everyone to do it. think back to Jordan, right? Poor Jordan has to reinvent the wheel every single time. We don't have to do that. We can help them. So here's some questions if you wanted to. So I'm going to introduce you to the concept of a playbook. A playbook is basically a way that you can do some sort of action consistently. So you can have a joining playbook, or a leaving playbook, or a transfer playbook, or a promotion playbook, right? Things that you want to happen consistently every single time. You give them that checklist. You can do it for yourself. And then you can talk to your manager or your peer and say, hey, was this helpful for you? Do you want to use this too? And you can kind of scale it out. If you're going to create a playbook for the first time, here's some questions that I think are really helpful. What's the intention? Who's affected? And how can we share that early to them? And how can we give the right managers a heads up that something's going to happen? Where are people going to be looking for information? Too often, I see that information is buried somewhere, and it doesn't hurt to cross-post into a place that people are going to find, right? Literally, we are all in our chat channels, and we can just scroll past the message if they see it multiple times. So you can kind of just make sure it's where people are looking for. You can even ask people, hey, where would you go to find this message, right? You don't have to have all the answers. When is the right time to do this? And even any tips. So if you've decided on those values that you want to imbue in your communication, a great place to make sure that it happens consistently is by embedding it into your playbook, right? Always have a thank you section. Always have an FAQ section. Whatever you think is important. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to get a feel for how a value itself can be expressed through communication. Pretty much any value can be picked apart, and with respect to how it can be role modeled or expressed. And hopefully I've filled your brain with a few ideas. Yeah? I got some nods. Okay, thank you, attentive audience. So now I want to step back for my last message and just say that this once. We're all doing our best, right? We're here because we care and because we're trying. And so you don't have to change everything all at once. You can kind of pick one thing to do and try. LeadDev right here is filled with people who care about this stuff, who think about this stuff, who try new things. And so instead of even putting the pressure on you and figuring out exactly what you need to do, my recommendation is just to follow 3 steps. 1, pick a value. 2, turn to your neighbor, talk to someone at lunch, here in the conference, or back when you go at home. Maybe you want to start a conversation in your team chat, and just say, what's the way we can be more blank in our comms? And you'll be surprised how many ideas flow through. Things that you've never thought about, stories that you may never know. Then 3, you have to try something, right? So those are the 3 steps. That's what I encourage you to do today, right? We get to be here in person because we care and we want to meet other people that care about this. Here's a great way to start a conversation. It's been a pleasure sharing my passion for building communication through culture with you. Good luck.